Right, to Geordie Journos, not my usual spot. We're quite often struggling to get usual spots at away games these days.
Yes.
Kicked out of Brentford, we find ourselves at, what is it, Baldock?
Yeah.
Services. It's a new one on us, not an often one we stop off at. But it's
Stopped over
second,
today.
it's the first time and then the second time now, just to dive in and get a quick Geordie Journos video up as quick as we possibly can to you guys. These guys have been doing their work and making sure everything's sorted for their various websites. Right, it was a unusual afternoon with some unusual answers from Eddie Howe, I think it's fair to say, in his post-match press conference. Both of you guys were in that press conference. We are going to talk in depth about what Eddie Howe said and what it really means, and maybe critique it as well, although some people aren't always sure about critiquing Eddie Howe. Although I'm looking at social media, I think there's a fair bit of that going on tonight after a 4-2 defeat to Brentford. Right, so I'm going to get the T's and C's out of the way first. Of course, we announced on Friday that we've got a brand new sponsor of all Geordie Journos videos. Proud sponsors are Mitigate, as this will be on the screen now for you guys. Mitigate transforms workplace mental health, mitigating legal risks, reducing absenteeism and boosting productivity, delivering up to £9 ROI per £1 invested. Book your free demo today. There it was. It's all down below as well. Of course, Four Rivers Financial Planning, as ever, down there too. And if you want the shop, you know where it is. Christmas is coming up. If you fancy something, jump in the shop. Right, that's the T's and C's. Like, comment, share, subscribe, as you know what to do. Right, onto the game itself. What we've literally just witnessed. It's fair to say it was a game of two halves. I'll let you talk me through what you thought of it, Dom, before we do come on to those kind of, in many ways, bizarre, contradictory, strange, excuse-like comments from Eddie Howe. The game itself.
Yeah, the game itself, I thought Newcastle in the first half looked like scoring at any moment. They were in control, despite Brentford almost sucker punching them, or at least capitalising on individual errors, or as Eddie Howe put it, collective errors. It was almost like a multitude of errors leading up to goals. I thought Brian Mbeumo and Johan Wissa, two very good finishes, but came about through poor play, particularly the second goal. Harvey Barnes just passes it straight to him under no immediate pressure, so individual mistakes, you can't legislate for that. Newcastle, to their credit, fought back twice, scored two good goals, Harvey Barnes being one of them, Alexander Isak being the other. Alexander Isak really should put Newcastle 2-1 in front, and if he does, potentially different game. Second half, and how many times have we said this?
Have you mentioned there was loads more chances than that in the first half?
I'm just talking the big ones. Bruno had a couple,
Longstaff hit the bar.
Jacob
Murphy had an open goal, a header.
Yeah. So yeah, it was 2-2 going on 4-2.
Yeah, Newcastle should have been 2 or 3 up. Really.
It actually did go on to be 4-2, but to Brentford, and that was the second half performance where Newcastle didn't really show up. And that's how many times have we said that this season? After an encouraging first half, second half, just no reaction. And Eddie Howe tried to make changes, which we'll get onto, which was to do with Jordan's question. Anthony Gordon and Sandro Tonali not starting the game. They did come on. Callum Wilson also came on. Kieran Trippier came on. Just didn't have the desired impact. Only until about 5 minutes of normal time remaining did Newcastle actually really put any sort of pressure on Brentford, and even then it was quite tame. Sandro Tonali had a decent chance, and then Brentford go there then and make it 4-2. So deserved win in the end for them. Newcastle, it's looking worrying now. This sort of monotony of, oh well, Liverpool was good, and then you go back, oh, it's 1 step forward, 2 steps back, or 1 step forward, 1 step back, however you want to put it. We knew they'd be up for the Liverpool game, yet always worried that this type of performance would happen. And I think defensively it was shambolic. You can point to numerous players as making individual errors during the game and costing Newcastle goals. And then, yeah, the conditions certainly didn't help, but that's something Eddie Howe pointed to.
Dom,
you're not having
stop.
that.
We'll come on to what Eddie Howe said after, and I think
the conditions
I
don't
think that
help.
Is ludicrous.
Conditions don't help if you're making errors, right? If a player is making an error, but conditions apply to both teams.
So I'm going to say I'm amazed. So the referee took a lot of stick on Wednesday about his potential. People said he's biased towards Liverpool, should have given Newcastle decisions. I am shocked at Mother Nature. for Mother Nature to favour Brentford and not Newcastle United on a day like today, that's shocking. It was ludicrous. For anybody to point their finger at Newcastle United did not, let's put this on record, Newcastle United did not lose at Brentford because of a bit of wind and rain. And it was a bit cold for a substitute coming on. I'm sorry, that's not why they lost. They lost because they made bad mistakes and bad decisions and didn't take their chances. But we'll come on to what Eddie Howe said in a minute. If you want to talk about the game itself, there was far too many of the players out there underperformed. Far too many made mistakes. And that happens, look, it wasn't because the wind blew that Harvey Barnes pinged a 40-yard pass across his own defence to a bloke who then went and scored.
No, but
it was nothing to do with the rain or the cold.
The third goal in particular, about 3 players misjudged the ball, the flight of the ball, wind, rain,
Nathan
conditions.
Collins didn't. He was looking at the same ball and watching it all the way.
Facing another way.
Nathan Collins didn't miss it. I think if that kind of excuse comes out from any other manager, Newcastle United fans slaughter it. And like I said before, you've got to say as you see. We sat through that game and not once did any of us in the moments after or towards the end of that game say, you know what, the wind's cost them today. No. I don't think those substitutes were warm enough when they came on. It was a bit chilly for them, wasn't it? I've not heard anything like that. If Steve Bruce said that, he'd get slaughtered.
Yeah, that's fair.
No, you're right.
And I think it's only right that they should call it out. I didn't think it was the worst performance I've seen from Newcastle United this season. That's got to be said as well. In that first half, they came off the pitch, they would have been devastated. They would have been looking at themselves saying, we have opened the door for them to get into this game. And Newcastle probably should have went in 2 or 3-0 up at half time. Realistically, they were the better team, and we were saying it. I was saying to you guys, Newcastle are so much better than Brentford. That second half was not the case. No. Second half, it was flipped the other way around, and that wasn't because the wind was blowing in a certain direction. Because funny enough, like I said, joking, and I'm joking on the Mother Nature thing, but Brentford scored 2 goals at either end. Newcastle scored 2 at one end and couldn't score at the other. It wasn't a conditions thing why things change. And I'm pretty sure every time Brentford played a through ball or put a cross in, there wasn't anybody blowing the wind and helping it out. Because it was the same conditions for both teams. And it wasn't that one dealt with it better than the other. It didn't really have a noticeable impact on the game. We've all been at games at all kinds of level of football where you can visibly see, for example, a ball floating and moving in the air, or rain like stopping a ball in the pitch, and there was none of that today. So I think the suggestion is just excuse making. They didn't lose today because of the wind and rain and cold.
Yeah, I mean, I would say it's a bizarre response. I understand why he may be picked out. I must add that he did pick out the weather unprovoked. My question when Eddie Howe referred to the weather was asked, you were free flowing, attacking in the first half, why wasn't that maintained in the second half? And that's when he referenced the weather, and then he referenced it being perhaps too cold for Anthony Gordon and Sandro Tonali, which isn't ideal conditions, and I understand that, but a manager who currently has the answers doesn't come out with things like that. I think he's a manager at the minute that is looking at his team and struggling to find what is going right and what's going wrong. 7 days ago we were talking about Newcastle not scoring goals. They've went from scoring goals to conceding goals. So he's actually fixed one problem and another one's eluded. I think he's scratching his head and pulling out his hair at Newcastle United at the minute because that consistency is not there. And he's just on his comments, he's waiting for it to click again. And from what I've seen this season, I've seen no suggestion of Newcastle United all of a sudden just going like that, and it's the consistency's back. And I think that's what I was hoping for, and I think he's trying to tweak things. But at the minute, I don't see how Newcastle United are going to be that team that we all hold them up to be, as this European competing team who can compete for European players.
Now, do they?
Well, the Premier League is very, very tight, but the 12th in the Premier League.
They're the 12th best team in the Premier League this season.
And at the end of the season, if they finish 12th, it won't be like you said last season. It won't be an asterisk, but it was tight. Yeah, only 5 points off.
Remember the wind. Remember the wind at Brentford. That cost right. Some points.
What I will say on the wind, Eddie Howe didn't.
I am tongue in cheek a bit, you know.
Eddie Howe said initially, and Jordan's right. Eddie Howe brought the concept of the weather into the room. He was never asked about the weather. It never came into any of our speaking. Eddie Howe mentioned it.
Does that not tell its own story as well, though, Dom?
Yes, yeah. But he said he didn't want to use it as an excuse. It's not an excuse. Yeah. Maybe it's a coincidence. But then, when Jordan asked another question about the substitutes, then him saying they were maybe a bit cold because of the weather. Again, it was when I was like, right, okay, you've now used it twice. Even if you don't want to use it as an excuse, you've used it twice. But the most worrying answer I thought he gave was actually a little bit earlier, was when he was asked about the attitude of his players, and because that was a big subject of the press conference. And he went, "Oh dear, like I don't know." That was the first 5 words of his answer. What did you make of that attitude? Oh dear, I don't know. And then he said, "I don't think it was a lack of wanting to win the game or anything like that. It just wasn't strong enough, their attitude." Which is calling that into question, but then also contradicts some of the stuff he was saying in the press conference on Friday.
So we spoke about it yesterday, and it wasn't really a spiky response by in the end, but I don't think particularly liked the question when I put it on him, and I said, does your team lack motivation against teams outside of the so-called Big Six? And he wanted to make it absolutely clear that was not the case, but then also said at the end of his answer, you can make that assessment after a game. And to be fair, I think from yesterday he's made that assessment that his players weren't motivated enough to go on and win that game in the second half.
So hold that point on the thing. I want to make a quick point. I was trying to jump in when you said it. The 4th goal by Brentford was scored by a substitute.
Yeah.
He was warm enough. Doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense, does it? That's a silliness. It's silliness.
You just don't bring it up if you're a manager. You have total confidence in your side. You don't bring that up.
If you believe what you're saying and you've got conviction in it, you don't.
Eddie Howe isn't intelligent enough to know that when you see that in print and supporters are reading it and he's blaming the weather, they're going to. Eddie Howe would know that. What is that? So
I mean, we're going to get to the realms where Alan Pardew used to say silly things like that.
Hill Carnival. That was a blow.
Yeah, there was quite a few. And Eddie Howe isn't in those. Those realms at all. But it's kind of like the similar type of thing.
Yeah.
And if Alan Pardew or Steve Bruce had come out with it, people would be slaughtering it.
Yeah.
And I think probably looking at social media, people are slaughtering it because it's as silly as we're making out, and it deserves ridicule. There's probably merits in certain parts of what he says. Look, but everybody had the chance to warm up. Everybody was a bit cold. We were all a bit cold. It doesn't make you bad. It doesn't make you a bad player. And it doesn't make you miss headers. It doesn't make you make really bad passes. Or, like Fabian Schär, get the wrong side of your marker.
It shouldn't affect your decision making, but it can affect.
What I would say about the performance as a whole is I think, as much as we're critiquing Eddie Howe's post-match comments, he can't really legislate for some of the mistakes that were made on that football pitch.
No, that's the thing. I think if you want to point the finger, I wouldn't say point the finger. If there's anyone to blame for today's performance, it's more on the players than it is Eddie Howe, in my opinion. So it's just Eddie Howe did not help himself with what he said afterwards.
So in terms of the way that they set up, I wasn't overly impressed by seeing Tonali and Gordon dropped out, because I think he's been searching for answers of how to get the team to play right, and they looked like they played right on Wednesday, to then suddenly change it because the lad had a bit of a cramp problem. He came on and ran about for half an hour and there was no problem with cramp at all. There was no problem with Gordon, who came on and had an impact. He had an impact on that left hand side. But I think you've got to look at the players. The system worked largely, even though I didn't like the way he'd selected the team. I thought Tonali and Gordon should start, but it actually worked, because in the first half they dominated possession, dominated chances. They had about 7 or 8 chances, clear-cut ones, that they should have been 2 or 3 goals ahead. So it wasn't really I didn't see that as an Eddie Howe problem. You can't legislate for Harvey Barnes deciding to drift inside and ping a 30-yard pass straight to the centre forward. You can't legislate for that. That's a mistake. Lewis Hall was really poor on the first goal. I thought him, the centre half inside him, and the player in front of him, midfield, I can't remember who was doing the covering. I don't think any of them really committed to saying, we're going to stop this guy drifting in on his favoured foot. And it was a lovely finish, don't get us wrong. 2 clinical goals, that first 2. After that, Fabian Schär put in a performance today, and I said it in analysing that it was akin with these Steve Bruce performances. That was as bad as Fabian Schär's been in quite some time. Nick Pope made some basic errors.
Could have finished 5-2.
Basic errors. Who else? Livramento. He was a willing runner. His distribution was dreadful today. That isn't on Eddie Howe. No. And I've said, a manager has to carry the can for a team's performance. I think looking at that game, the way they played in the first half, he probably set them up right. He set them up right to win that football match. It was just that Alexander Isak didn't quite take a chance. Jacob Murphy headed the ball over when he probably should do better. Bruno's probably not struck a ball quite right when he should finish. Harvey Barnes hasn't taken another chance despite taking a really good one himself. They're not Fabian Schär's mistake. It was I point the finger for both goals. The third in the second half, the third and the fourth, I thought he was really poor for.
Yeah.
Livramento was really poor for the fourth.
Yeah.
And I thought the covering players, again I'll have to watch it back, but the covering players for the third goal were really poor
bad,
as
yeah.
well.
I think Eddie Howe maybe highlighted that was a very collective effort.
So when the ball comes over Schär's head, it's the people behind him as well who just don't react. And Nathan Collins can't believe his luck, how much room and space he's got to find a finish. Now, like I say, the conditions didn't affect Nathan Collins. They didn't affect anybody else. Let's not kid on. What they might have affected is the two players who went for the original header. Who knows? We'll have to see from all angles to see if the ball got caught in the air or whatever, or the flight changed or whatever. But that doesn't stop everybody else. There was 3 players behind that and only one of them reacted, and it wasn't a Newcastle player. So no, I don't necessarily look at it and say point the finger for the way Howe set them up or the tactics.
No, I
thought they looked on it.
Largely okay.
I thought they looked on it in that first half, but the second half was really like a throwback to what's gone before. It was a surrender, a real surrender.
It really was, yeah. It was.
Maybe it worked for 10-15 minutes. It was an even game, but then when they got that third goal, Newcastle never looked like coming back from it.
Yeah. Final half hour again similar to West Ham, when they just didn't look like scoring at all,
and the changes didn't work.
And the changes didn't work. Yeah, I mean, they were cold. That's what they said. But the Tonali and Anthony Gordon substitution just didn't have.
I thought Gordon
the desired effect.
Yeah, I thought Gordon was alright.
He had a couple of runs.
Almiron didn't work. The changing system didn't work with Wilson coming on.
Yeah.
He dropped Isak further back. Isak was good in the first half.
Isak just disappeared from the game.
Yeah,
didn't he?
Isak disappeared when he went into the 10 role, and that was very akin with what happened when he did it against West Ham recently as well.
Yeah.
That suddenly he changed the system and it didn't work.
Does he play there for Sweden? Is that where it comes from? Where you can play this?
It looks like he does. Yeah, I've only seen highlights and looked at, you see where he's played. He does play off Gyökeres, who's the main striker.
Yeah.
And obviously in certain systems, in certain ways of playing, it probably suits him. He can't do that. He's great. He was even dropping in, trying to find the ball, but just couldn't get in the game. It just didn't suit him today. And I don't put that blame on Callum Wilson either. I don't think he deserves any criticism. I didn't think the midfield functioned quite right at times today.
Bruno had one of his worst games, particularly in the second half. I thought he was decent in the first half.
He was alright, yeah.
Second half, I thought Bruno was poor.
Yeah, he faded badly, didn't he? Wasn't the only one.
And I thought Joe Linton didn't have a good game. And I've went through that's virtually the whole team now.
Yeah, you could pick out any individual player.
Yeah.
I thought Harvey Barnes, he scored a lovely goal. So wasteful. He tried, didn't get us wrong, the lad tried to beat his man.
Put a good ball in for Jacob Murphy. Could have easily finished the game with the goal. Jacob Murphy was probably man of the match by default because he got 2 assists.
I thought Lewis Hall had a tough day, and he's been brilliant this season. I think the only one who can possibly, and again I'll have to watch it back without knowing every in and out of the game, I think one of the only people who could probably hold his head up reasonably high was Dan Burn. I didn't see anything in particular that stood out to me that made him think, he had a really bad game.
I thought because of the way Brentford played, he was pulled about quite a bit.
I thought he was doing the defending with 2 centre-halves,
but Dan Burn has been pulled to bits quite a lot at Brentford. It's not out of the ordinary, but I actually thought he stuck to his task as valiantly as he could.
I don't think Longstaff particularly put a foot wrong, but he didn't give you anything.
Yeah.
He didn't give you anything in the game.
Hit the bar early on.
He hit the bar early on, but he just did a lot of tracking and running, and there was nothing that in a game like that where you had all the ball, you probably wanted that bit more, which is why I thought Tonali has to start. Yeah. Tonali gave you that against Liverpool, a little bit more with the ball.
It was interesting, Eddie Howe's answer to Jordan, I thought, where he picked out Anthony Gordon and said Anthony Gordon can be pleased with his performance. The midfield didn't work.
Okay.
So he's never named Sandro Tonali, but he went, Gordon did alright, midfield didn't work. Sandro Tonali, when asked a question about Sandro Tonali and Anthony Gordon, so hasn't.
Them two dropping out maybe just felt like he had to do it.
He is right, I don't think the midfield worked.
But I actually, you said before the opening 45 minutes, they were fine without Gordon and Tonali. But when they come on the pitch, they didn't look ready, and they were worse for it. But how many times? Was it West Ham as well when the substitutions come on and they don't make them better, and it's trying to tinker the system and dropping Isak deeper and whatever, and it just hasn't clicked.
I think that's if there's if Houghton look at himself after today, if you're going to try and take some blame, and which you should as a manager.
He said he has to do better.
He said that, and I think that's one of the things he has to do better is if a game's not going the way that he wants, can he change it for the better rather than almost weaken his team every time that there's a change made, because it just becomes very disjointed with the changes. It's not never. He has had substitutions that have worked. God, if you're going to make that many substitutions as a manager, it would be a shock if you didn't have some that didn't impact and work. But in the main, particularly recently, that hasn't impacted games in the manner in which you'd want them to.
No.
It hasn't been for the betterment of the team. He knows.
He agrees.
Yeah, definitely. I'm pleased somebody agrees.
But he said the sort of matchday squad wasn't fit enough after Wednesday night. He said too many players were tired. He wished he could have made more changes. I followed that up. Jordan's question, I went, how are a team apparently less fit and less consistent without European games midweek? Okay, they played midweek with Liverpool, but the expectation at the start of the season, which is something that Paul Mitchell and Darren Eales both said in the summer, Newcastle will be better for lack of European football. It's a blessing in disguise in many ways. They've regressed, they're more inconsistent, they look less fit in terms of the players on the pitch, less intense. So why is that happening? And Eddie Howe just had to say, well, hold my hands up, we're not reaping the rewards for that, we need to do better.
So what I want to get sort of drill down on really is, a lot of people out there will have seen the football match. So we've analysed a lot of the things that we've seen, what we liked, what we didn't, what we thought needed criticism, what didn't. What people didn't see and what they probably won't see is what you two got to see. So what was your feeling in the press conference? So you were sitting there, you got to ask your own questions, both asking reasonably pointed questions, particularly yourself by the sounds of it.
Not me.
No, it sounds like asking pointed questions, but I'm saying that was quite a...
It's more of an attack, I'd say. Yeah, on
it wasn't
Newcastle,
an attack, but it was
on
more,
Newcastle as a team not being good enough.
Yeah, it was sort of saying you kind of gave an excuse as a football club as to why things didn't work last season and why is it not working now, which is a fair question.
Which you couldn't answer, probably.
Yeah. What was your feeling coming out of the press conference? Jordan, I'm going to come to you first. Because people out there wouldn't have got a sense for what was it a press conference where people stuck it on him? Was it a press conference where he looked dejected? Did he look happy? Did he give us a little bit of picture and colour and context for the people out there who didn't see this?
Well, I think he looked dejected when he got asked about players' attitude, because then it was dear when he got asked that question. Did people necessarily put on him, if you like? I wouldn't say so. I think there was questions as to why they've regressed in many ways.
What was the mood like in the room? What was the mood like? What was emanating from Eddie Howe?
The thing that really got me, and it was my question, was when he mentioned the weather. And I know as a journalist, and you write those words down, and even as a fan, and you're reading that, it looks bad. Yeah, it does look bad, and it looks like you're searching for excuses. And he tried to make it clear he wasn't searching for excuses, but for him to still go there, and when he said that out, and I know the fans' reaction. I haven't really looked at social media, but I know for a fact that won't go down very, very well. And yeah, that was
because it didn't go down. It didn't go down well with yous. Really,
no, I knew how it would be received.
Yeah, I felt
he didn't have to
almost bad that Eddie Howe said that.
Yeah.
Like for Eddie Howe, because I mean, why have you said that? That's a manager who's just, I don't know, he's clutching at straws, not really having the answers or conviction in what he's saying, or he's not saying what he really wants to say. In my opinion.
I think he feels after that game. I think he felt let down by his players.
Yeah,
that's the emotion I got from him, really, where he was asked about what he said in the dressing room at full time, and he says he keeps his sort of assessment short. They will review it next week, and it'll be a long review, as I said, to try and find out what's gone wrong and how they fix it. So I think he's feeling let down after that. And to be fair, as we've went through it, I can understand why he does.
Is the weather thing almost like
storm in a teacup?
Yeah, his almost way of deflecting from the players a little bit and giving them that excuse.
Possibly.
Trying to protect them, but when it probably wasn't a day where you could say that. I thought it was a bit silly, as I mentioned earlier, in a jokey kind of manner, but I didn't. I thought it's desperate stuff when managers are pointing fingers at things. I thought his
interview with the club was worse in terms of putting it on the weather than he did in our press conference, because he tried to make it clear to Jordan that it wasn't an excuse, maybe it was just a coincidence. But then the cold thing, like I said, is a bit more excuse like. But
look, it maybe the weather is a valid thing, but it was the same for two teams, and there was one team that ran away with it in the second half. That's the only thing I would say about that.
Who scored in both halves at both ends. It doesn't make sense that the weather had an impact on one and not the other. And that was what I was joking about before, but it's real. Yeah. It can't have had an impact on one and not the other.
I just think he's leaving West London today, and I think he's scratching his head. What more can I do here?
Newcastle United also train on probably one of the most windiest squares of North Tyneside that is possible, having lived there all my life, in and around there.
Yeah. I mean, it's talking next week and him reviewing the game, so it's a massive game next Saturday against Leicester. Huge. I would say that the next couple of games, actually, who is it? Leicester, and you've got Brentford in the Cup, and then you go to Ipswich. That is three
wins. Huge. It has to be, really.
That's three huge games, because the up and down theme of the season, they're playing well against the big teams and the lesser teams. That cannot continue, because look, they've got aspirations to finish in Europe, and they're going to be absolutely nowhere near based on what they're doing. And it has to turn quickly, because look, the table's tight at the minute, but it will eventually sort itself out. And Newcastle don't want to be in a position where they cut adrift, which at the moment, based on the results, will probably happen unless they turn it around.
This might be controversial, but if you play like you did in the first half today, in the next three games, two of them being at home, you're probably I think you at least win 2 out of the 3.
Yeah, you probably do.
But if you put in the kind of performance that you did in the second half, or like they did against West Ham for half an hour, or like they did against, it's accumulative over the season. They're not going to, and they need to start turning it around. I'm quite frustrated by some of the stuff that I've seen this season, but I wouldn't say I'm massively surprised. I was not. Somebody's tooting there. He's frustrated too. I don't think I'm surprised by much of what I've seen this season.
The seeds were planted last season.
Yeah, I thought so.
What is sort of sprouted this season.
Yeah,
and you kind of, in the back of your mind, thought, I think it could be the injuries, but I was never sure. It's definitely the injuries. And it has played out like, it hasn't really been the injuries, has it?
It wasn't the European football
either.
Wasn't,
no.
Newcastle's best runner last season, they won 7 games out of 10. Was when they were playing Champions League football.
Yeah.
And now, in that same sort of spell, 2 wins in 11, it's 10 points from 11 games. That's nearly relegation.
2 wins in the last 11 Premier League games. Yeah. That's an astonishing statistic.
Yeah.
That's not a statistic that sees you finish in the top half of the Premier League. If you go the next 11 games,
it's relegation.
Oh no, it is. It is. Probably not with the amount of draws they're getting and how low the bar is in the Premier League these days.
10 points.
It's not far off, is it?
30 points after 33 games. You're big close.
You're in there, aren't you?
You're big close.
You are. And I think the stats speak for themselves. You're the stat man. They do. 2 wins next. If they go the next 11 games and only win 2, then they're obviously gonna struggle. Right. We're at a service station. We need to get this video up. So I hope you've enjoyed everything that we've had to say. We've got a quick 25 minutes in. It's nice and dark where we are. Hopefully we're nice and bright as well. But thank you so much. Like, comment, share, subscribe for all your Geordie Journals content. Of course, the T's and C's. There's a shop underneath. Proud sponsors of all Geordie Journals content. Mitigate came on board. That'll flash on the screen again now. And of course, long-term sponsors for us, financial planning. We will next see you when? This week?
Yes, press conference, Eddie Howe press conference.
And maybe something in between.
Possibly.
We'll see what we can do.
Let me know what you'd like to talk about. If you have any interesting topics you'd like us to dive deeper on, is it Eddie Howe's press conferences and what he's like and what he's saying and the demeanour around it? Is it more technical analysis, statistical analysis, anything? We will go into any detail that you guys want us to. And I might even be able to convince these two to jump on a live this week. But we'll see how it goes. Right, like, comment, share, subscribe, click the bell for all your Geordie Journals content.